So today we're going to be talking about how to hold effective and productive meetings. So the webinar is entitled Taking Control of a Runaway Freight Train, Strategies and Guidelines to Ensure that Your Meetings Stay on Track and Productive. And so it was interesting. I had a lot of feedback from some agencies that wanted to learn more about how they can improve their meeting productivity, what kind of structures could they rely upon and use to ensure that their meetings stay on track. I'm sure that everyone has been to at least one in-person meeting in which perhaps you came out of it feeling very frustrated or unsure that the purpose or the objectives of the goals of the meeting were met. And sometimes it does feel that a meeting can turn into a runaway freight train where you don't really know what to do if things get off topic or out of hand, so to speak, or off the rails. So we want to explore this topic a little bit more in depth for today. So this is the agenda that I put forth for everyone. So I'm just going to go over just each point very rapidly. So first I want to talk about org-wise organizational standards initiative. So this webinar is a part of a series that is looking at further developing organizational capacity as part of the OCASI's org-wise organizational standards initiative project. So I'm just going to give a brief overview. Next, we're going to talk about what do we mean by meetings, what constitutes in-person meetings, why do we bother meeting, and then some common complaints about meetings as well that individuals have shared or that they may feel. Next, we're going to go through a step-by-step process for managing effective meetings. So we're going to start off and break it down into 3 clear stages. So at first, we have the planning stage. Next, we have the meeting stage, and then finally the post-meeting stage. And I'm going to go into, this is where the bulk of the presentation is as well. And lastly, I'm just going to point out a few policies and procedures that can help to support effective meeting facilitation and also to help further develop the structure of the meeting as well. So also I have about 4 presentation takeaways I hope everyone can take away from for this presentation. So first I want to introduce the org-wise Organizational Standards Initiative Project and the voluntary standards. Next, I'm hoping that individuals will be able to identify some of the necessary stages of effective meeting facilitation, and also how to identify some challenges or problematic behaviors that may arise when meeting in person and what you can do about them. What are some appropriate responses? And then lastly, what are some of the policies and procedures that we can connect to productive and effective in-person meetings as well? So I want to start off just by talking a little bit about org-wise organizational standards. So it's actually one of OCASI's first projects that addresses capacity building at the organizational level, and it's designed to assist OCASI member agencies and also agencies operating in the immigrant and settlement sector, the refugee serving sector as well, here in Ontario. With the org-wise organizational standards project, agencies can assess their strengths and identify opportunities to develop their organizational capacities in 4 principal areas. So they are as follows. A community-based approach, which refers to how to measure the impact of your agency on the community, how your agency engages with stakeholders and communicates. Governance and strategic leadership. This is related to strategic vision, mission, board roles and responsibilities, and board structure. Operations, which also includes financial management and tech capacity, and finally human resources as well. With the OrgWise site at www.orgwise.ca, et aussi en français à Capacidorg, CAPITOLG.ca, capacidorg.ca, which is all resources available in French. There's a variety of online electronic resources that can actually help to address some of your agency's organizational development needs and priorities. And these include such things as sound policies, procedures, manuals, how-to guides, workbooks, etc. to assist in developing the infrastructure of your agency as well. Well, let's go now to the meat of the presentation, no pun intended there. So when we talk about a closer look at meetings, what I'm going to be focusing on today is actually in-person staff meetings. And so obviously with this topic area, there's a variety of limitations that I have to put forth immediately. So there's several dimensions and factors we need to consider when we're planning meetings and running meetings, especially if we want to ensure that the end goal is productive and effective meetings. So this sort of topic area can be addressed and studied from a variety of viewpoints. So we can look at, for example, cultural competencies and how we can address some cultural barriers in meetings. We can look at meetings from a gender perspective. What are the historical relations within meetings between traditional gender roles, and how does that play out as well? And even other environmental factors. I won't be able to go into too much detail about all these other dimensions. I'm going to be trying to base this presentation looking at the structure of meetings as well, and how we can manage meetings more effectively by further developing these structures. So just bear that in mind as we go forward today and move through the material. But first I want to open up with a poll to get everyone started. So I want to ask everyone, put out there, in a given work week, how many hours would you estimate that you dedicate to in-person meetings? So is it 0 to 3 hours, 4 to 6 hours, 7 to 9 hours, 10 to 12 hours, or perhaps even 13 or more hours? So I'm going to launch a poll now. And if everyone could answer, that would be great. So please select from the following based on how many hours you are that you dedicate to in-person meetings in a given work week. So we have approximately 56% of individuals have voted. So keep on going, everyone. If everyone could just vote one of the answers, that would be great. So we're at 67% right now. I'll give everyone maybe about 10 more seconds just to fill in one of the numbers there. All right, so we're almost at 80%. Any other individuals? Please fill in the answer. That would be great. And we'll go and wrap up that poll now. All right, so I'm going to close that poll. I'm going to share the poll with everyone. We're going to look at what are the results of that poll. So we have overwhelmingly 47% of individuals say that they spend approximately 4 to 6 hours in in-person meetings. Slightly less, between 0 and 3 hours, 27%. We have 13% at 7 to 9 hours. And also 13% 10 to 12 hours. And with this poll, no one has responded to 13 plus hours. Okay, so this is actually really, really good information. Thank you all for participating and sharing. So I'm going to keep that in mind when we move forward with this presentation as well, keeping that in the back of our minds as we kind of explore some of these topics. So let's kind of get to what do we talk about, or what do we mean when we're talking about in-person meetings. So let's explore this topic area a little bit more. So when we talk about in-person meetings, we're actually talking about the act or process of individuals convening, so coming together, for the purpose of achieving a common goal, and this is usually done through interaction and exchange of resources. When I say resources, I'm not just talking about material objects, I'm also talking about intangible or ideas as well. So for example, exchange of resources can be actually ideas or time, for example. The idea of convening for the purpose of achieving a common goal also suggests that individuals have invested interests as well, that there are stakeholders when we talk about meeting in person. According to Rogelberg et al., he did this individual did a study in 2006, and he gave a conservative estimate after researching that approximately 6 hours a week on average is what individuals dedicate to meeting as well. And this is a conservative estimate. This doesn't really address the fact that there may be a lot of time and effort and energy that goes into also planning meetings, the takeaways from meetings, what other work has to be done as well. So we talk about in-person meetings. There's a lot of different types. So we have, for example, ad hoc. We can do off-site meetings. We can do team meetings, or in all-staff meetings as well, or even one-on-one meetings. And when we talk about arranging and facilitating in-person meetings, it really does involve opportunity costs. I don't know if everyone is familiar with that term, but it's an economic term, although it's widely applicable to a lot of other ideas and topics. So it's the idea that the cost of an activity is measured in terms of the value of the next best alternative activity that's not chosen. So it's related to scarcity and choice. And this can be measured in direct costs. So for example, money, or indirect costs. So this can be a little bit more difficult to measure, but time is often a really good example. So if you have to dedicate 2 hours of your day to an in-person meeting, that's 2 hours of your day that you're not able to dedicate to another activity or task. So let's look at some common reasons to meet, and obviously these are just 7 examples. There may be more examples, but we're going to just focus on these reasons of why we meet. So 1 is information exchange. This involves sharing and also receiving information. Next we have self-awareness or consciousness raising. So this is talking about maybe important issues that need to be addressed or further explored as well. Learning. This could be professional development, include new training, and development of skills. So this could be on new technologies, various methods or new procedures or ways of doing activities. Next, we also have creative thinking and generating ideas, commonly known as brainstorming. We also have critical thinking. So this is that can include goal setting, problem solving, where decisions need to be made. Accomplishing tasks. This is related to monitoring task completion, setting timelines, reviewing progress on items, and lastly, building relationships and commitment. And so this is where meeting infrastructure and supporting effective and productive meetings can be actually linked to human resources, because in-person meetings are inherently social. They can be good opportunities to improve staff relations, to build out further relationships as well. And this also can come to play in all these other reasons to meet. So for example, if we look at a meeting where the reason is surrounding information exchange, some of these building relationships and these new commitments may actually be present there as well. One example of one reason that, another reason that's not necessarily to meet is, for example, an emergency meeting where individuals need to meet in a time of crisis to make split decisions or just to process what's going on or an issue. So next we're going to get to some common complaints about meetings, and I'm sure that everyone has perhaps filled at least one time, maybe one of these or at least witnessed some of these complaints or heard about these complaints or even felt this way after or during an in-person meeting. So for one, we have time mismanagement. So whether this is wasted time, if meetings are starting late, if people are occupying or taking up too much time, unclear purpose or objectives. People don't understand why they're meeting. Why are they present? What is the end goal? What are we working towards? Competing interests and conflicts. This can actually be seen as, say, for example, between management and staff, or between two parties as well, or interests because there may be other, it may be personal interests versus group interests as well. Lack of appropriate participation. So this can include things such as interrupting or passive participation or leaving frequently. Unclear roles. Poor leadership. So no one really knows who's in the driver's seat. That's how we can have meetings turn into a bit of a runaway freight train. Unfocused discussion. Little follow-up. So there's not really much follow-up on action items or what are the next steps following the meeting. And energy zappers. So meetings can be very mentally and emotionally sometimes draining. And this can be depending on a number of reasons, depending on what the meeting topic is, who's involved, the length of time. And also, meetings can force individuals to explore uncharted territory or issues that may have been on the back burner, but they actually need to be confronted as well. So let's look at meeting effectiveness. So I actually found this really interesting sort of observation, according to Johan, in her work in 1994. She writes that meetings are the windows into the microcosm of working group culture. So I thought this was interesting. So let's pretend that if there's an individual coming off the street or the sidewalk and wanted to sit in on one of your in-person meetings, what do you think they would observe, or what would their impressions be of your organization? Do you think that they would have they would think positively of the sort of organizational culture and values based on this interaction or this encounter? So when we talk about working group culture, we're talking about the collective set of virtues and patterns of behavior, and these are linked to actions and also, patterns of intentions that are linked to actions and behavior as well. Meetings can also be great opportunities to promote morale and job satisfaction, and also to learn from colleagues and access resources. Often I hear in the sector, individuals may be working in silos where if you're in an organization, you may not really know some of the ins and outs of another person's jobs or responsibilities or what they're doing. So it could be a great opportunity to learn more about that as well. But ultimately, effectiveness is often attributed to the unseen structures that shape in-person meetings. And so this is what we're going to be exploring in the next coming slides, that this is a phenomenon that needs to be actively managed and leveraged as well. And that facilitation, which is a professional development piece actually, it's the use of knowledge or group processes to design and deliver the structure that's necessary for effective meetings. And this requires analysis, effective communication techniques, active listening, decision-making, and also consensus building. Any questions so far with some of the content? Next, we're going to be moving into some of the stages of meetings, step-by-step. If not, I can continue. Please feel free to submit your questions as we go along, and I'll pause perhaps in a few slides, and I can take a few questions as well, if anything has come up, or if there's anything you need more clarification on. All right, so let's move forward then, and I'll take any questions that may come up in the next few slides. So let's go to meetings step by step. So I want to introduce this concept. It's called the PDSA cycle. And this is actually from the research of Dr. William Edwards Deming. This research was actually conducted many, many years ago, but it's still used as a basis for a lot of research that's done even nowadays in terms of what should the meeting cycle look like, how does it play out. So you talked about four principal stages of meeting cycle. So one, we first have the planning stage. This is talking about identifying who the participants are in the meeting, what's the history of the group, reviewing the mission statement or the purpose of the group, talking about delineating relationships, tasks or the goals of the meeting, and logistics as well. Next we have the do stage. So this is actually moving forward through the agenda to actually achieve the goals as determined in the agenda as well. And there's usually three dimensions of goals. So one could be a relationship goal. So this is talking about getting to know each other interpersonally as colleagues, building cohesion. This may not be explicitly stated, but it also can manifest itself within agendas as well. Next we have the task goal. So let's talk about understanding the project at hand, what resources are available, how do we develop a work plan, and how do we involve stakeholders. And finally, we have the learning goal, which is talking about identifying learning gaps, what knowledge needs to be acquired, what needs to be further developed, talking about some of the lessons learned, and also talking about celebrating meeting accomplishments. Study, this is the evaluation stage, so it's determining did the meeting meet the objectives, what's the satisfactory level of those participating in the meeting, what can be improved for next time. And finally, we have the act stage, which is talking about what happens in between meetings. This is the collective action taken on delegated responsibilities and also for the development of the future agenda of other meetings that occur. And it's also acknowledging that there is a lot of work that happens between meetings as well by staff members. So we're going to use this PDSA cycle model to actually go through some of the stages of planning a meeting. So let's first look at the pre-meeting stage so we can understand this to be the plan stage. So oftentimes this can be overlooked or not as much investment can be put into it. If we have a very, very heady meeting, an agenda may be put together within 10 minutes time, and it may not be very, very thought out, or other considerations may not have been taken. So coming across some research, I had one research, Rogelbert actually as well, suggests that time allocated to planning should be roughly half of the time of the meeting itself. And this is related to talking about that if you have, for example, a 3-hour meeting, that approximately an hour and a half should be dedicated towards planning the meeting and considering all the factors as well. So next we talk about planning committee may be required. So these are considering factors such as meeting duration, the content, who is participating, and also lastly talking about using the 5 W's when planning an in-person meeting. So who, what, when, where, and why. Just want to pause now. I actually have a question that comes up which talks about planning a meeting. How does it reflect if participants are required to attend versus if participation is voluntary. And that's actually something I'm going to be getting to in the next few slides when we kind of dissect these 5 W's when planning a meeting. So that's a really, really good question, and that does actually affect, or that can affect participation and some meeting outcomes. So hang tight on to that. I will get that into a few slides, so thank you very much. So first, when we look at those 5 W's, we want to start with why. Why are we meeting? Every meeting needs a clearly defined purpose, and it also needs to be reflected in the agenda, or if there's any other materials or documents that will be distributed to meeting participants. So if we think about an agenda, we can talk about how an agenda should be a strategic meeting design. Because as we all know, meetings, in-person meetings are investments in time and energy and resources and capital. And they do need careful management. So again, an agenda should clearly communicate the purpose and outline items to be covered. It's also handy to use a bell model. So this is when we talk about at the very beginning of the meeting, a series of brief, sometimes non-controversial items are listed first. More important and time-consuming or heady items, quote, take up the priority, and that's in the middle of the agenda. And then finally, we talk about unifying items or closing remarks at the end of the agenda as well. So we can think of it almost as a bell coming up. And lastly, an agenda should have a framework that's well-defined, meaning the purpose, objectives, and topic areas are clear, but also it should be flexible enough that it can be open to change, and there should be room to maneuver, especially on the part of the facilitator as well. Now we get to the what. So what kind of meeting are we going to hold? So if we're talking about in-person meetings, I mentioned in the previous slide, we talked about ad hoc meetings, all staff meetings, team meetings, off-site building or team building meetings. So what kind of meeting are we actually carrying out? What kind of materials will be required? Will you need flip chart, paper, PowerPoint, handouts, etc. Budget. So this is often kind of a sticky point for some organizations or agencies that meetings in and of themselves are huge investments in time and money, as we all know. To have individuals sitting in a room in an in-person meeting means that we are actually investing in, we're using their time and energy put towards meetings. So that in itself has an opportunity cost, a direct cost that can be measured. But we also want to explore the idea that, well, depending on the type of meeting or what the purpose or objectives are, we need to be aware that the meeting needs to match those objectives as well. So for example, if we look at a meeting's purpose where the principal purpose is brainstorming a creative session, maybe the idea of a change of venue might actually be needed to kind of spark creative ideas and creative thinking. Think outside the box. And we can look at that in terms of that could be an opportunity cost where it actually may be more beneficial than staying in a boardroom where that's the common meeting place as well. When we talk about meeting objectives, they should be SMART, which is a great acronym that I've learned my time here at OCASI. That means, it stands for being specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, or results-based, and then timely, or we can also say time frame or time-oriented. And looking at what will be the end product of the meeting, what are people going to be walking away with? Also, will there be an agenda as part of a participant package? Should relevant information be included before getting to some of the content of the presentation as well, or the meeting? Lastly, we're going to look at who. So I had that question about, well, is this a voluntary meeting? Is this a mandatory meeting? And that may impact on the sort of participation and meeting the outcomes of a meeting as well. So we need to look at who will be at the meeting, but also who should be at the meeting, and keeping that in mind. Also being aware of accessibility concerns. And we're talking about the both visible and invisible barriers when planning meetings as well. And the concerns of attendees. So for example, we can look at if there are stairs where you may have someone participating in a wheelchair, or is there a prayer room available depending on the length of time of the meeting to ensure that the needs of attendees are being met. And then looking at who everyone participating in the room does have a role and accompanying responsibilities. So we have the leader, which is usually the person that convenes a meeting, or a team captain, and provides direction on the purpose. We have the facilitator. So this is someone who uses knowledge of group processes to design and deliver the structure that's needed for meetings. So sometimes we have both the leader and the facilitator can be the same individual, but oftentimes it may be more advantageous to have those separate as well, or to differentiate. Helping plan the agenda is a key function of the facilitator. The facilitator will help guide group discussions and keep participants on track. They also act as a neutral party. We have a recorder, and this individual will help document the process, deliberations, and decisions. And finally, we have stakeholders, or participants. So I think stakeholders, it may be a more powerful term because it is implying that everyone present in a meeting should have an invested interest in the outcome or the process. And it is related to relevancy in attitudes and interests. So when? Let's talk about if you hold a meeting on a Monday morning, is it a little bit different than holding a meeting on a Friday afternoon? If so, why is that? We need to also be aware of schedule conflicts and then adding in breaks to meetings when appropriate as well. And also giving ample notice to individuals. So we can use online invitations or calendars. Doodle is a really, really good website in which it's a great application that you can use to schedule meetings and also make meeting requests. Whoops. And then let's look at where. So this is the idea of location, location, location. Even how the room is set up, how are chairs arranged, and this is also related to the purpose of the meeting. So for example, is it like an auditorium style, a classroom style, is it a hollow center? Are there lots of little small group tables? And then also we want to factor in costs where it's being held as well. So I wanted to just kind of look at these three pictures. So we have one on the far left is a picture of a coffee shop. One we have an outdoors nature sort of scene. And finally you have a boardroom. So I wanted to sort of get the idea that depending on the nature of the meeting or the purpose, it may be advantageous to be in different places. So for example, if we're doing a or say a brainstorming creative session, where would you think the most appropriate location would be? If it's a one-on-one performance management meeting, where do you think the most appropriate location would be? And also, let's talk about a strategic planning process as part of a meeting. What would be different about if it was held outside in the woods by this river, for example, in the second picture, versus in a boardroom or in this neighborhood coffee shop as well? So let's talk about the meeting do stage. So we're going to talk about, now that the meeting planning stage has been over, we've discussed the 5 W's, what we need to take into account. This is when people are the meeting is actually about to happen or it is happening. So this is when we have people arriving. So punctuality, this actually sends a really, really great message to individuals of the importance of the meeting and the items being addressed. It also honors the time and the caretaking to those participants that did arrive on time. And it is for respect for colleagues as well. Meeting ground rules. So these are the terms and conditions of a meeting that it's really, really important to establish right off the bat and have everyone agree upon them as well. And that doesn't have to be an extensive list or complex. It could just be simply one rule. So for example, respect for others and for the process. And obviously that can be interpreted in many, many different ways. That's a really, really good simple rule I like to use when meeting as well. Then finally, defining roles and responsibilities of all present individuals. So we just talked about some of the 5 principal roles. But in order for people to gain buy-in into the process, so for example, if it is a voluntary meeting, to get people to gain buy-in and to understand why they're present, they need to know what's needed from them. Where do they fit in? How can they contribute? How can they contribute to the process to make sure the goals and the goals of the meeting are met and the purpose is fulfilled? So now let's pretend that everyone's arrived at the meeting. We've established the ground rules. Let's talk about moving through some items. So I just want to talk about, these are some points that I came across during my research that's really, really good to keep in mind. So we have the agenda. We're moving through areas. So when we frame discussion, usually there's 3 sort of principal parts to a discussion. There's the opening, where multiple ideas are generated. This is where information is gathered or shared. We have the narrowing. This is where information is organized, where you can actually make sense of what's being said. We combine ideas, and we also evaluate our options. And finally, the closing. This is where decisions can be made, or this can lead into new discussions as well. priorities are selected, agreements are reached, or maybe understood that this needs further consideration or further study. If that's the case, you can create a parking lot, which is just a term for having a piece of paper, flip chart paper, where you can write additional issues that require more time, more study, more discussion, that they cannot be adequately addressed given the time constraints of the current meeting as well. We also have to be aware that individuals learn and understand ideas in very different ways during meetings. So for example, some individuals may be visual learners, so use of visual aids. Other individuals may be hands-on, so using the idea of games with aims or exploratory activities so people can understand processes, procedures, and ideas more clearly. Or even role-playing activities or exercises as well. And then finally, the facilitator needs to be aware of using active listening, so not just hearing what's being said, but also internalizing it, thinking about it before responding, paraphrasing to the group. Again, also if things get off topic, restating the purpose of the meeting and linking it back to that, and also staying neutral. Meetings should be opportunities where everyone can participate in a way that is conducive and meets the purpose and objectives of the meeting. Or if they need to bring up another issue, it can be put in the parking lot and explored further. And lastly, breaks. I can't stress enough this. I know at least here in OCASI, we do always ensure that we do schedule breaks because some of the information is very, very heavy, and it does take a while to process or understand a bit better as well. So I wanted to talk about, during the discussion portions of meetings, this is where often disagreements or arguments or problems may arise. So I found this really interesting piece, according to Duncan, in 2005. He actually put a framework for how we can facilitate consensus. And so when I say consensus, I'm talking about when an impasse is reached or if the discussion begins to lose its momentum. Consensus doesn't necessarily mean complete agreement, but it's linked to how issues are framed. Can we come up with an acceptable resolution that is supported even if it's not the favorite, quote unquote, the favorite of each individual? So first we talk about, let's frame any issues or a dilemma so that individuals can see the bigger picture. So again, bring back the idea of purpose and goals and recognize that it's related, they're interconnected. We want to talk about removing insecurity, recognizing that discussion may need to take different forms just because people and individuals learn in different ways. Encourage active participation and also the opportunity to discuss items together. Building little agreements along the way. Use and leverage those agreements and consensus or those ideas that have been agreed upon and use it as leverage to work through some of the tougher items as well. Motivate creativity. So if we have individuals that constantly are raising issues or about things, put it back to the group. It's okay to throw questions back because maybe someone within the group may have some really good ideas as well. Summarizing and fractionating. This is where we can break up complex ideas into more bite-sized pieces, what I like to say. And also, breaking apart information into manageable chunks. And this is actually really be helpful so that individuals can see connections between some of the issues being raised and some of the purpose and objectives of the meeting as well. Keeping conversations on track and timely. Again, you have the idea of using a parking lot. If there is an issue that comes up that cannot be adequately addressed in the agenda or not enough time can be allocated or dedicated to exploring that issue. And finally, if there's an impasse still, putting to the group, what will happen if we can agree on this or at least we can't come up with a solution? And that doesn't mean that a solution may need to be required at this stage, but also maybe there can be some action items for further exploration and discussion. So what are the next steps? How can we move forward? Or even, is this the best time to be discussing an issue? Maybe it may be saved or better to be discussing it at a later time as well. So now let's go and talk about the challenges in meeting. So there's a lot of instances or issues that may compromise the integrity of an in-person meeting. And when I'm speaking about this, I'm actually focusing on behaviors. And this is really, really important to do because we don't want to necessarily single people out or ostracize people in front of in front of a group. We want to actually talk about behaviors and corrective measures that we can take to ensure that behaviors are in line with ensuring that the meeting can be productive and effective. And this is like it's related to the idea of structure, that it shouldn't just be reactionary. So an agenda is not just reactionary, but it can also be proactive. And also the facilitator's skills and skill sets and those invested in the meeting, they also have a stake in ensuring that the meeting can meet its objectives and purpose. And lastly, about cohesion and its importance, I actually came across research from Miranda, scholar Miranda, 2004, and she writes about how cohesive groups tend to work harder to achieve group goals, and they actually they outperform less cohesive groups. They often experience less self-censorship and conflict, and are also more effective on alternative generation and evaluation. So the idea of coming up with new ways of coming up with ideas and evaluating what those ideas would look like, how will that play out, and being more objective and critical of oneself as well. But I want to actually kind of draw everyone back into the presentation. There's a lot of information to digest, and I want to actually put out to the group, when meeting with colleagues, how often do problematic behaviors threaten the effectiveness of those meetings? So I'm just going to launch that poll. And if everyone could be able to answer, that would be great. And so at this point, it's how you interpret what is to be problematic and what's not problematic. Maybe also perhaps you may be performing an action or behavior that could be problematic as well. So currently we have 53% have voted. So if everyone could just pick one of the following, so either never, rarely, sometimes, often, or always. So again, when meeting with colleagues, how often do problematic behaviors threaten the effectiveness of those meetings? Alright, so we're approaching 70%. I'll give everyone maybe a few more seconds to just add your final answers or your responses. If you haven't voted already, please do. That would be great. Alright, we're almost there. So we're at 79%, so maybe 2 or 3 more seconds, I'm going to close this poll. Alright, I'm going to close the poll now. I'm going to share that with everyone. So very interesting responses that we see. So we have 53% of individuals have responded as sometimes, that yes, sometimes problematic behaviors threaten the effectiveness of those meetings. 33% said rarely, and then 13% replied often. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that no one has responded never, because as we all know, that behaviors can kind of crop up. And also no one responded as always either, which I think is actually really important to note. Thanks everyone for responding. So with that, let's start talking about, well, what are some steps that we can take to deal with sort of disruptive or problematic behavior? So one is to name it. So we describe problematic behaviors. Step 2, we need to make an impact statement. We need to tell members in our meeting how this is affecting the process, how it may be affecting those participating, and also talk about reiterating the purpose and the roles and also the responsibilities of meeting participants. And finally, we can talk about redirecting the problematic behavior. So this can actually be put to the group as to what can be done or what should be done. So I want to just give everyone an example. That problems need to be stated without judgment or without that there is a problem with an individual as well. So here's an example. An arts organization held a theme fair and it wanted to raise funds for its operation. So one of the planning committee members raised the concern that a vendor was selling items that didn't conform to the theme of the fair. So how it was framed. So let's look at how the different ways to frame this sort of conundrum that this individual or that this committee is in. So one, you could frame it as, should we let individual A sell his items next time? Or B, how do we ensure items are congruent with the theme? So it's not talking about pinpointing an individual and what needs to be done, but also framing is more exploratory. Well, how do we ensure that we can move forward next time? How do we ensure that we have congruency, we have practices that are in line as well? So with that in mind, let's look at some sample behaviors, and these are just 5 examples. There's many, many more. And the Ontario government has a lot of really good human resources surrounding a whole host of other sort of problematic behaviors that may arise in meetings of what to do. So let's talk about first interruptions, or little chit-chat sidebar conversations. And also one one term I kind of came across, which I kind of like, it's calling these sidebar conversations can be so-called, quote, sniper conversations, where if someone's in disagreement or they have something kind of something that they don't like, they may say it to their neighbor, but actually not put it to the group so that it can't be addressed. So with interruptions and sidebar conversations, again, it's important to refer back to the meeting ground rules. Also need to keep in mind seating arrangements, that sometimes, depending on where people are sitting or how the room is organized, it could be more conducive to facilitating more effective discussion and negating interruptions, or actually maybe unfortunately helping out sidebar conversations. So sometimes individuals have seating arrangements. With interruptions, we can also give out jobs or roles. We also have to keep in mind that people may be interrupting or getting restless, so we want to perhaps schedule breaks. And then the importance of asking questions instead of simply making statements as well. With passivity, or people that may clam up, it's important to differentiate between those that may be passive and those that just may be quiet. There are, in some in-person meetings, some people may not be as comfortable speaking to a group, or they may be less confident, or they may be approaching a meeting with anxiety or even uncertainty. So these, with some individuals that may appear as to be passive, they actually just may be feeling a bit uncomfortable. So for example, if we're talking about putting open-ended questions to a group, maybe it's more advantageous to discuss those in smaller groups so that you have the opportunity to give those individuals an opportunity to discuss with their neighbor, and then we can bring those ideas back to the group. If you're asking an individual directly about what their viewpoints are, how they can contribute, use encouraging body language, smiling, nodding, being open, and giving individuals time to gather their thoughts as well. Be attentive to what's being said and also reiterate that and reaffirm the importance of sharing as well. Negativity or negativism. So this can be kind of seen as a wet blanket, so to speak, where individuals may be very, very negative about a proposal, or they may do everything that they can to cut something down. So in these instances, it's important to point out successes of similar situations in the past, or using boomerang techniques, and ask those, well, what can we do better? What should we learn? How do we ensure this does not happen again? Also, one good ground rule I like to use is when framing any sort of concerns or negativity, quote unquote, is you can frame it in 3 parts. So one, if a proposal or an idea is being put forth, we can say, firstly, what you like about the idea. Secondly, what do you need more information on? And then thirdly, what are some of your concerns? So see how we can break it up so we can actually ensure that we're acknowledging the value in participation and also some of the ideas. And we can frame it as, well, I need a little bit more information on this. So maybe it will provide someone with an opportunity to clarify as well. Next, we look on to leaving frequently. So this may be a case of restlessness or boredom, and this could also be that perhaps the roles and responsibilities of all participants were not clearly stated, or maybe some individuals don't understand where they fit in. So this is a kind of scheduling breaks, and again, the meeting ground rules that people should be present, or encourage individuals that if they need to leave earlier or if they may be leaving frequently, to just let the facilitator know as to not interrupt the group process as well. And we can also use this time during breaks to speak privately with individuals that may be frequently leaving, and the effect of their behavior on the group and the process as well. And also reiterate that their contributions do matter, that they have been asked to be a part of the meeting, or they came to meeting voluntarily because they felt that it was in their interests and it should be in their interests as well. Any questions regarding some of these behaviors or anything I've gone over to this point? I know there's a slew of other sort of problematic behaviors that may arise. So one example is bullying, but that can be a whole other webinar as well. Anything to date? So some other so these are just, again, a snippet of some of these behaviors that I've actually witnessed during some meetings, or that has been brought to attention in meetings that I participate in, and also in the research that I've done as well. Again, it really can be dependent on the organization, the size of the meeting, who's involved, where it's held. So there's a lot of other factors, and it may really influence the kind of behaviors that may be present. So we even need to think about if you have a major meeting before a holiday, people may be distracted, and they may be they're more thinking about their vacation time. Oh, I have a question from a participant, so I'll just read out loud. So how would my board go about introducing the rules? They have been doing things this way for years. Okay, so this is a really, really interesting, great question. So when we talk about so we can link it back to the rules are inherently linked to roles and responsibilities. So we want to, again, reiterate the importance of ensuring that everyone understands their role in a meeting, and also what their accompanying responsibilities are. From this way, we can actually, because some individuals may forget, or they may become complacent in what their roles are in a meeting. And this is a really, really good way to reiterate the importance of their presence, why they're there, why they should be contributing, and why their contributions matter as well. From that, it can be it can be a little bit easier to introduce meeting ground rules. And also using, even just, again, they don't have to be long or complex, they just be something simple as respect, ensuring that everyone is treating each individual present with respect, and the process with respect as well. With board meetings, it's a little bit different from in-person staff meetings, but actually that may be raising a point for a future webinar on that topic, so I thank you for that. Hopefully that answers a little bit of your questions as well. It can be very, very difficult to break some old habits or persistent habits that have been going on, as mentioned, perhaps for years, but it's the idea that the first steps need to be taken in order to, because ultimately how we can see, again, as Johan stated, that working group meetings or in-person meetings can be understood as a microcosm of organizational culture. So it does reflect on those present and those involved. Thanks for your question. All right, so we're going to move on. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to respond. Oh, I have one more question. What is rambling? Okay, for one person, it may be expressing oneself to another. Any suggestions on how to avoid people feeling like they are being shut down? That's actually a really, really great question. And so when we talk about individuals that ramble, or they may carry on a little bit longer. So as a facilitator, it can be very, very important to ensure that, to ask those that may be quote-unquote rambling, if they be able to summarize their point in 1 to 2 slides, or 1 to 2 points. So brief, concise, fractionating it, and again, putting the idea forth that it may be a little problematic for some individuals because they need to process it in smaller chunks. Also, the idea that with rambling, you can put it to the individual, like, is this the best time to be exploring this issue, or is this something that we need to add to the parking lot? And you can put that to the individual or the group. And most of the time, the individual may say, you know what, maybe we'll add to the parking lot, or maybe I will hold off on this at this moment. But there are some instances where some people may state, no, I want to talk about this now, this is important. If that happens, as a facilitator, put it to the group and say, all right, how about we all agree that can we all agree that we add 5 more minutes to the agenda to discuss this item? And then after that, we can move forward. And from there, hopefully we can figure out the issue, discuss it, and find a closing to it. And if that doesn't work, then it indicates that this needs to be an agenda item for the next meeting as well. So I'll take one last question. Thanks very much. So how do you approach staff who have negativity towards changes that are out of their control? Okay, so for example, funding cuts, changes in documentation. All right, that's really, really good. And we have to be aware that when meeting, it can't just be about process or task. Emotions can be involved. And this is where communication, open communication is very, very important. So for example, there can be, when you have a new process or a major issue, this is where planning really, really takes a lot of priority. So for example, having a committee to oversee how the meeting will run, and also expect that those issues and topics may come up. So when there is a major structural change, or if it's an issue of funding, perhaps funding cuts, and we know that in the sector in Ontario that is a reality, it may not be enough to just drop that in as an agenda item, but also to really take a lot of time planning out, and even perhaps including staff members as part of the planning committee, as to how do you introduce these kind of sort of sticky topics, and how do you actually have a positive discussion, or at least come to a consensus around it. Thank you for that. This also really comes down to how your organization works. Is it more hierarchical, bureaucratic, how big or how small? So we also need to keep in mind how individuals work or how they may approach a meeting. That will also shape it as well. Thank you. So let's go back to the post-meeting stage. This is the meeting has just ended, and as the icon kind of shows, it reads 9 hours later, hooray, meeting adjourned. And I'm sure that some individuals have been in meetings where it has dragged on longer, and you feel exhausted, you feel mentally drained. And this phenomenon is called meeting recovery syndrome. It's the idea that after a meeting or following a meeting, individuals need to take breaks from issues. They also need the opportunity to reflect, but also approach an issue with new eyes or fresh eyes. So for example, if it's a very, very intensive session about a new, for example, funding cuts, people may need a cooling off period due to frustration, but also to mentally recharge as well. And that's where this is important to be able to provide assistance and support following those difficult items to individuals and meeting participants, because they may need that, and also you would not want that carrying over into another meeting as well. That's where we talk about evaluation. So what was accomplished? Are there any outstanding items? So we go back to our idea of our parking lot, and how can we improve this process for next time? And this is where all individuals, regardless of if they were the facilitator, the leader, the recorder, or the stakeholder, they should be sharing their advice and their guidance as well. And lastly, distributing the minutes. This is giving individuals an opportunity to study what was said, what was done, what was covered, and also noting what actionable items to take, and also those that are assigned to them, assigned to each item. So let's look at the in-between meeting stage. So this finally, going back to that model we TDSA model, this is the ACT stage. So what are the in-between activities? So these can be both formal and informal. So formal activities can include perhaps establishing a committee to study an issue, creating a task force to further explore or examine an issue or come to develop new ideas. Maybe policies need to be revisited. Maybe procedures need to be re-examined as well. Perhaps if sort of a contested item or a hotly debated item comes up, maybe more work needs to be done, and perhaps bring an outside facilitator to come or to examine this in further detail as well. And informal, this can be simply talking about what transpired at the meeting with colleagues. What are the hopes and fears or nerves about the next meeting? Also talking about debriefing. And again, trying to apply new processes to the work. So for example, if a new system or procedure is introduced, this is where it will actually be implemented as well. And also concerns or issues may be raised again that can be included on the next meeting or as part of the action items as well. It's also very, very important to recognize that committees and subgroups cannot be created arbitrarily without any sort of direction or resources or support. If that is the case, they are going to be doomed to fail. It's important to recognize that any action items that are overseen by a subcommittee or group should be viewed or regarded as just as important as if the meeting was still carrying on. So again, going back to that model, it's the idea that it is a circular process, that it's always carrying into another stage. And so we need to really think about that when we talk about the in-between meetings, what happens, so that things don't fall off the wayside and people still feel that they can be part of a participatory process in which their voices can be heard, but also is meeting the objectives and purpose as well. So we're wrapping up now. So I wanted to just talk about a few, two policies and procedures that I actually came across, and I really, really like them. They're from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Please don't let the name throw you off, even though they actually had a really, really great framework for developing a good agenda and also evaluation procedures. So this actually will be available. All the research that I've performed or done today and shared with you will be available on the OrgWise website as well, including the agenda template and also the next slide, which is about evaluation. So with the NOAA, it actually divides its agenda into a bit of a table format. So it starts off by talking about the opening, what is the purpose, what are the objectives, what are some key topic areas or decisions that need to be made, and also anticipating what kind of discussions may come up. It also includes a list of participants and their roles and responsibilities. Next we have the meeting leader, the person that convened the meeting, and also the facilitator, and even also any breakout group facilitators. So then it moves down into a table format where it arranges 3 headings to help organize some of the minutes and the items, what was discussed, what was the content, and what was decided, what are the decisions. So first it talks about time. When did it start? How much time was allocated per item? Estimated and actual. Next, in the second column, we have topic, objectives, and activities. So for example, it could be the name of activity, or say if a vote needs to take place. What's the objective? What's the purpose of discussing that one item or going through that activity? What are some, also noticing not just what is said or the action items, but also what's being noticed, what are some kind of interactions that are taking place. Say for example, if a very unpopular item is being discussed or there's a lot of group dissent or a lot of unease, that should be noted as well. And also talk about total time, how much time was allocated for that. And then finally, what setup and materials were needed. So for example, if you have an activity where there's a PowerPoint presentation about a new legislation, immigration legislation at the federal level that will impact frontline workers at the organization, and they need to learn about the changes. That can be filed under use of a laptop, PowerPoint, again, and some of the supplies needed. This also actually is really, really good to do because it will inform following meetings what is needed or what may be missing as well. And then finally, it ends with sort of any votes or decisions made, and if they are carried or they're defeated. And lastly, what are the action items and outstanding items? What, if any, committees will be in charge of those items, and who is a part of that committee as well. And finally, we talk about evaluation. So again, coming from the pages of the NOAA, with the evaluation, it's fairly clear and it's concise. It provides individuals with the opportunity to discuss feedback and concerns in a variety of forms. So it's not just a Likert scale, where you go from strongly agree to strongly disagree. There's also some short answer and then some long answer formats. This actually honors the fact that individuals may have different ways that they want to express their opinions. Perhaps saying that you, quote-unquote, strongly disagree with an item is not enough, that individuals may want to convey how they can improve or what they need to share to improve the purpose of the meeting. And also that should also be explicitly stated that any evaluation should not just be an opportunity for individuals to gripe and moan. It really should be linked back to, did the meeting fulfill its purpose? Were the objectives met? why or why not, what can be done for next time to ensure that this process is fulfilled and in a way that honors the purpose and objectives and the participants of the meeting as well. It also includes things such as what were the meeting logistics like? Was the room okay? Lighting, even something like the setup of the room, location, what kind of materials were distributed, were more materials needed, was more additional information required, and again, how to improve for next time. So these are a list of all the references. As you can see, there's been a lot. There's quite a few, and again, those will be posted on the OrgWise website. I just wanted to pause if anyone had any questions about any of the content. I know it's a lot, and again, we could have probably spent a whole webinar on even just one or two of these points, for example. But if there's any final questions, I'd be more than happy to take them up now, or I can direct you to further reading if it's something that I may not be able to answer myself. Again, I encourage everyone to visit the Ontario. It's actually, for the research I brought up about coping with problematic behavior, it's under the Ministry of Ontario and the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. They actually have a table of contents talking about dealing with some of the problematic behaviors, what to do, how to recognize and identify them. Oh, I just had a question about, will the PowerPoint be sent? Yep, so within 48 hours, everyone participating on the meeting will be sent the PowerPoint presentation and the slides. And please feel free to distribute them to your colleagues if you want to share them with your board. Hopefully this may be a good way to start the conversation, or maybe hopefully you'll be able to examine, well, what are your meeting structures? Do you need some work in them? How can you improve them as well? And yes, you will be sent the link, and it will also be archived on the OrgWise website at www.orgwise.ca as well. Please feel free to post any questions you may have on the OrgWise Community of Practice located on the website under the Forums tab. I'll be opening up a new forum or a new thread where individuals can kind of explore if there's any other follow-up questions or any other sort of outstanding items. And I will include, again, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, that link directly to some of the problematic behaviors. Oh yes, I will be able to send that link to you, everyone. Yes. And I encourage you to all check out the other research that will be added onto the website. It is very, very helpful. And please, if you have any ideas for any future webinars that you want to explore in the area of human resources or any other areas of the standards, feel free to drop me a line, send an email to me, or even leave me a voice message, or link it on the forum as well. I'd be more than happy to. This presentation came up as a suggestion from one of the OrgWise users, an agency that was interested in learning more about it. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for your participation. I really, really appreciate your questions, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you all in January for the next webinar.